LAWsome by ConsultWebs. Breakthrough insights to build a thriving law firm with your host, Tanner Jones.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another LAWsome podcast. Today's topic, it's around strategic outsourcing, how to find, hire, and manage remote talent. Very excited to have my friend Jason Melton on the interview here. He's the co-founder of Whittle and Melton, LLC. He's also the president and co-founder of Regents Remote Services. He has over 20 years of handling state and federal legal issues and has a world of knowledge in the area of outsourcing, specifically for law firms. Today's topic, we're going to cover outsourcing for attorneys who are looking to hire top talent and certainly continue to be productive in that effort and not throttled down. So, Jason, thanks so much for taking time to join us on the show today.
Yeah, Tanner, thanks for having me on. Topics I love talking about.
Well, this is certainly a big topic. It's a growing topic. The idea of outsourcing has, I think, grown on this country. You know, there's been probably an evolution of the last several decades of embracing the concept of outsourcing for a business. And I think it'd be a good place really just to kind of start from the beginning, or really around the idea of what outsourcing is, but specifically addressing maybe the how-tos. For example, where do you go to find trustworthy people for a business today? Let's start there.
Yeah, well, you know, as a law firm owner, you get intimately engaged with your labor pool, you know, pretty early on owning a firm, right? And you can figure out what are the strengths and weaknesses of your area. And, you know, those of us who have law firms in rural areas know that we probably have a lot of folks that are good at like hand-to-hand combat, going into courthouses, talking to clerks, figuring stuff out, this sort of thing. But maybe they're not the best researchers and writers. And the alternative to that is that the researchers and writers that you can have, you don't have to pay that much because they're probably not that great. Whereas the folks in the cities, you know, they have labor issues that are different. It's usually not an issue of talent. It's an issue of, can I afford all these people? And so we all have different, you know, labor issues, but, you know, remote talent and offshoring for the longest time was really a negative thing. It was seen as almost like a national security issue. Oh my God, you're going to have your phones answered in India. They, you know, they made a TV show about it, which I thought that TV show was hilarious. But, you know, for the longest time, it was really demonized. And I think basically the last, probably starting around, you know, 15, 16, 17, there was a culture shift in our country with our youngest labor. They were not as engaged in careers. They were a little finicky on needs and demands about what would keep them interested in a job. And candidly, they just, obviously not everyone, but a majority of them, or at least a mass of them, were really unproductive and non-engaged and very difficult to really lean into, invest in as an employer. And so I think as a necessity, because of that cultural shift, and, you know, some of that is probably has something to do with, you know, with pandemics and recession and terrorist events and 9/11, and you kind of ball, and school shootings, you ball all this stuff up, and probably the advent of social media where you're just aware of everything also. It makes people think, you know, maybe a career is a waste of time because in 5 years, my whole world could change, right? And I think that certainly affects kids, as I think it would affect all of us if we were that age. But it's affect the labor pool. So there has been this push to find people who, you know, are willing to put on helmets and run through walls and be team players and learn and really lean into a career. And all of that is a function of both culture and economics. And, you know, the perfect balance is when you can take advantage of those cultural and those economic shifts to provide a better life for someone, provide a stable working environment, and then in return, get, honestly, quality of work that you would never get in the U.S. for lots of reasons, but mostly economic and cultural. And that's where I got to the point where I got frustrated training the same people for the same like 2 or 3 spots in my firm. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, the rest of my firm has been here for 12, 15, 10 years. Why do we have a turnstile at these positions? And that's when I started to look to Mexico in particular. And for me, I looked to Mexico because of my upbringing.
That's interesting. Let's spend a moment there, because that's it's clear just based on that. It's this concept of outsourcing has grown out of business necessity. This is not just an interesting idea, an entertaining idea to try out. It was born out of.
Yeah, who would set out to open a business to hire people thousands of miles away? Mm-hmm. That would be a weird way to start a business. I'm sure people do it now. But like 10 years ago, well, if I can hire people in my community, why wouldn't you do that, right? When you get all-stars in those positions and you're hiring them remote, that's the biggest win-win you're ever going to get. Mm-hmm. To be able to hire that kind of talent at whatever reduced pricing you're getting, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but there is certainly diminishing returns when you're chasing price. Once you pass the threshold, it honestly doesn't matter, and people spend way too much time focusing on price. Mm-hmm. But when you can find that combination, it's great. And the thing about it too that people who do this will appreciate, and I had this fear when I started, is that your staff will not be threatened by these folks. They will feel empowered by them, because they have all-star players that are committed, that want to run through walls for your staff to help your firm in ways that other people in similar positions never have, or at least haven't recently. And they will be encouraged by this and want to use them, almost like you're handing them a supercomputer to use. Here, you can use this special computer. I got it just for you guys. Not, hey, I'm going to hire this person who likely is going to replace you. Nobody thinks they're going to get replaced when you hire remote. They know, but if you approach it correctly, it should be empowering for everybody.
Yeah, clearly the whole purpose of going out and finding help is to find top talent. You've referenced that phrase a few times, and I would agree with you. There's no point in even pursuing this if you can't find strong help, somebody who's going to be around, is going to be a huge asset to the entity. But part of that obviously starts with getting the interview right. I'm curious to hear your take on interviews. Any particular interview questions that you've found that works well in helping to find the perfect talent?
The irony of what you just said is that you would think talent should be the reason that people want to do this. But honestly, the biggest reason most people want to do this is cost. And that's a horrible reason to want to do this, just to drive down your costs. Because as law firm owners, we should be mindful of our costs. But the whole point of what we're doing is trying to increase the client satisfaction, increase the client experience in our firm, and deliver great results, right? Mm-hmm. And now if you can do that and you can start comparing costs of different services, that's okay. But just to go do something because it's cheap is odd, but it happens a lot.
Sure.
And when firms approach me about doing this, it's usually the first question they ask. And I'm like, I'm going to answer your question, but I want to tell you why we're really talking. The biggest example of that is when you're hiring legal assistants, don't hire legal assistants in other countries. Hire lawyers. The economics will allow you to do that. And that was my first lesson on day one when I called my now partner in Mexico. He said, "What do you want?" I said, "I'd really like to get a couple of case managers." And he's like, "Okay, so can we hire some case managers?" And he's like, "Why would you want to do that?" And I was like, "Because that's what I'm looking for." He's like, "Yeah, but let's get lawyers." And I'm like, "They'll do that?" "Absolutely." And so you're able to hire basically people who are grossly overqualified for positions in a way that you could never afford in the United States. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason to do it, is you can get people to perform legal assistant positions with incredible talents that you can train into, paralegals who draft motions, who draft lawsuits. My firm, we haven't, I think, a first draft of a lawsuit, with a couple exceptions. We probably haven't done one in the U.S. in 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
First draft is always coming from Mexico because, I'd say 85% of our lawsuits are very similar, right? There's some sort of car accident, some sort of premises liability. Now, the cases that are super unique and whatever, we'll probably draft those in-house. But for the most part, first draft's coming from there. Discovery is going to be reviewed, right? Your sort of, rote motions that come up normally, that kind of stuff can be handled. So there's so many things you can do. But to get back to your question, hiring, the first step is interviewing. I think one of the most important things for interviewing is allow the people to talk. Some of these people are fluent in English, but they don't use it in their daily life, and they need a little time to ramp up. And if you like somebody and you have a second interview with them, you may find their English to be even better in the second interview, just by having a second interview. But in the beginning, I like to let them talk about themselves just to get the butterflies out and talk a little bit. And then usually one of the secret questions I always ask is, do you speak English currently in your daily life? As in, like, we've been talking now for 5 minutes. When's the last time you had a 5-minute conversation in English? Do you speak English at your job, right? And the reason you ask these questions is simply to find out whether or not they're using English enough to know, hey, this is probably as good as you're going to get in English. Or this is someone who's fluent in English, doesn't use it much in their personal and professional life, and you have a strong chance of getting markedly better English as the process moves on. And I've seen that with my staff. They tell me, Jason, I'm dreaming in English now. I'm speaking to other people in my private life in English now, and they think it's incredible. It's because they're working in English, right? Mm-hmm. So it becomes part of their life and part of their, who they are. And I think that's the most important question you can ask in the first interview. The other stuff is just really social cues you're going to pick up. Is this person, ready to go to war? Are they ready to fight? Mm-hmm. And, I always tell people it's like interviewing in 1994 when you interview people in Mexico. You will see almost immediately a drive, an interest to please, an interest level in the work that sometimes we don't see in our domestic applicants.
Mm-hmm. A passion behind it, for sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, they see an opportunity for a career. It's a really, it's an honor to work for an American law firm, right? And many of these people, they take care of their families. In Mexico, it's not uncommon, especially for women, to still be living at home until they're going to get hitched up, right? And they might have some older parents at home, and so it's a really big deal. You can sort of transform, a house with a job like this. So it's a really cool thing.
Jason, let's move into some key things you've learned that have benefited your business in moving more into the remote or international workforce. I'm curious what you've found specifically in comparing employees U.S. based versus remote or international. What have you found specifically related to talent? Have you felt like you've had to give up certain levels of talent in this effort, or has there been this kind of natural balancing effort that you've had to work through as you've transitioned more of your workforce internationally and remotely?
I think the biggest thing, my goal when I started this was to back up every position in my firm, so that basically I was bulletproof to a mass exodus or a downturn in the economy, mm-hmm. or some other poacher coming in and trying to pay off I've been in business for a while now. We've lost employees to poachers. They come in and they're like, mm-hmm. well, instead of trying to just grow your own people, just go offer a ridiculous amount of money to people who already work somewhere else, right? So that happens from time to time, and I don't blame them for it. I get it. But, for me it has to do with me, not them. I am constantly reminded about how much I don't give them enough credit for in terms of where I set out goals and what I think is possible. When I first hired lawyers to be legal assistants for Mexico, never in my wildest dreams did I think they could work in litigation.
Mm-hmm.
Never did I think they could draft complaints or draft motions or research things and give me incredible guidance for mediation, to research things and give us guidance for trial. I was super happy with the idea of them helping with demands, updating medical records and bills, that extra point of contact for clients like an email or a phone call. How are things? Have you been treating? These are all things we have to do. It all has value, and it was still worth the value to do that. Mm-hmm. But for me, my biggest thing is really appreciating, and I'm constantly reminded of this, how much they're capable of, how much they want to grow, how much they want to be more indispensable in the firm. Intake people, same thing. They want to learn more. They want to ask better questions. Having your own intake staff is something that everybody should get to, should strive for. When you have people who are vested in your product, they have an invested basis for that call. They know it's going to go to the people they work with. They want to see that there's a good outcome for that person. Mm-hmm. And they know that if things don't go well in that call, they're going to hear about it, right? Maybe tomorrow from somebody in the office. That's a lot different experience than a call service. And some call services, they do a great job for what they're working with, but let's be honest, they're not fully invested like someone in your office would be. And when you have these relationships and you really allow these people to have no ceiling on what they can do, and that's, I think, the biggest takeaway, is when you're training these people, do not create ceilings for these folks. They want to learn something, give it to them. Mm-hmm. Some of these people are. I've had two legal assistants leave me in the last year and a half. One went on to be a top hospital administrator, and the other one is now a professor at a law school. Mm-hmm. Think about that. When would you hire a legal assistant in America whose alternative job would be to be a professor at a law school? That's not going to happen. So, and this is the kind of thing that's available.
Let's move on to a slightly different topic here, but obviously very related, and that's around the term of offshoring. Offshore hiring versus a term that I'm not as familiar with, nearshore. Obviously, I can make assumptions on that, but that seems to be a term that's growing in the world of outsourcing. Tell us the difference between nearshore hiring versus offshore hiring.
Well, technically the difference has to do with water. So if you're near shore, you're using the same time zones, you're not having to cross bodies of water, you're near shore. As opposed to offshoring, where it's Pakistan, South Africa, Philippines, what have you. Mm-hmm. And there are obviously advantages to working with somebody who's maybe the same or one or two time zones different, as opposed to 12 time zones or 8 time zones. Certainly, you get people at their best. They're better rested. They're not distracted. Their workday is essentially what they desire. But the other thing is, and we have most of our staff is in Monterrey, Mexico, which is about it's less than 2 hours from the Texas border. Mm-hmm. It's a very bicultural town, in that they really follow Western and certainly Texas sort of cultural ideals. And there's so many flights into that city per day. If you wanted to, you just fly down there and have a meeting and go see your folks. I go down 3 or 4 times a year. Obviously, I'm sort of like the hair club for men guy. I'm not only a client, I'm the president, right? But it's right there. It's not difficult at all. They've got American branded hotels. American Airlines flies there. I think Delta flies there. I think you can get flights from Chicago, LA, Dallas, Charlotte, Miami. Basically every major port you can get to Monterey. It's a very industrialized town. So the advantages of nearshoring are pretty great. And it's not just for law firms, for any kind of industry. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why Harley and John Deere and all these, Honeywell, these huge companies, there's a reason why they're down there too.
What do you find on the culture side? Because obviously every business owner, I can't say every business owner, but most business owners who are studying business recognize the importance of culture and feeding into culture and taking great efforts to ensure that, you know, a culture is strong, it's productive, it's working together. And so the natural thought for someone who's not really leaned into outsourcing much in their business is that can easily jeopardize what they've worked hard to create and to build. I'm curious from your experience in obviously working heavily in the offshore business, what have you found that it does to culture, and you know, what's the good and the bad from your experience?
The toughest ones are the one-offs, when the firms hire one person offshore or nearshored. You know, that person's going to feel a little isolated. It takes great effort to get them to feel like they're in your culture. You know, one of the things we do normally, immediately when we onboard somebody, we decorate them with merch, T-shirts, nice, mugs, pins, whatever, to help them feel like, hey, they're part of a team, right? And I do think, as silly as that is, I do think it's very helpful. And the best example I can give to you is, go find that one person in your office who feels like they don't have any pens or T-shirts or whatever, and ask them if it's important to them. You'll find that it is, because they feel like for some reason they didn't get it, right? But, you know, when you're having team meetings or lunch and learns, these sorts of things, or even division meetings, have them pipe in on Zoom. At this point, we all have TVs in our office. They're so cheap these days. You know, have them pipe in. Not a big deal. If you're having a big lunch party or whatever, you know, like, you can call Regents if you've hired through Regents, and we'll provide them lunch to help them eat lunch with the team who's having lunch in your office.
Nice.
There's all sorts of things you can do. Those little things really do help. But the biggest takeaway is, if you can hire a group in Mexico or a group in some other country, they will develop actually their own culture within their area, right? And you can find a way for those cultures to sort of talk to each other. They'll have different experiences, but there'll be lots of similarities. And, you know, that's the most exciting part, is when you feel like you've developed a group of people who have their own culture, but it's still your culture. It's just sort of a Mexican version of your culture, or a Filipino or a Pakistani or whatever. And that's been so great for us. I love our group. When the group gets big enough, you know, for certain positions, you can talk to them about who you want to hire, right? Because, hey, I don't want to mess up the culture. Why don't you guys look at these videos and tell me which one of these people you would be most interested in working with, right? Yeah. So you once you have that culture, you're going to fight to keep it, right? And so I've been really, I guess, jealously guarded of that culture. I just brought on a new intake person in Mexico, and after I finished the interviews, I got down to the two that I liked, and I called my supervisor. I said, hey, I'm going to send you 2 videos. Who do you think would integrate best with the group? Because I'm not there every day, right? So I want to make sure she's happy.
I see that for sure. And the beauty there is that you're also not restricting them to be who they are. Just as you said, it's like they become just kind of an evolved piece of the culture. And the added benefit there is that you've diversified your company, which then allows you to reach an even broader audience, I suspect.
Right. Like my folks in Mexico, they have a book club. There's no book clubs in my Florida office.
That's cool. Yep. Yeah. Well, so you've talked about, it's a fascinating concept, and I heard about this a couple of years ago of a law firm, U.S. based, hiring lawyers as case managers down in Mexico, and it seemed so foreign, for lack of a better word, to me to pursue that. But clearly you've proven this model, and you're growing it, and you're helping a lot of law firms as well in this process. But I'm curious, at the beginning of that phase, like, are you restricting your hiring exclusively to somebody who is already in the legal specific industry, or are you finding opportunities to train up even if they're outside of legal?
Well, I mean, the best example of that is that oftentimes we'll find really good candidates who are finishing law school. And so sometimes those candidates are honestly better than people who are practicing law currently. The truth of the matter is we have sort of two levels of lawyers that we sell from Regents, and one is a kind of a baby lawyer, like just graduated, 1 to 3 years, maybe last year of law school, and then we have another class which is like a senior level lawyer. And honestly, the success rate with the senior level lawyers is not as good as the lower one. And the reason is they've been practicing law. They've learned how to conduct their day. They've learned to do whatever they're doing. And, there's something to be said about being able to train somebody when they're fresh and out of school and looking to learn something, and they're not bogged down with a bunch of other things. So, I like that senior level position in a supervisorial role, which is what I did with my intake. I hired a lawyer. She was working at customs at the airport, and she was she'd been a lawyer for 7-8 years, kind of comfortable. And I was like, you want to try something new? I'd like you to supervise my intake people and supervise some of the paralegals as well, but mostly the intake. And she was like, yeah, that sounds great. And obviously, we provide health insurance and pays good. Our office is nice, and she's been incredible. And, to me, that's a great use of that seniority, is to be in a position to supervise people. And as opposed to me really wanting to lean on her legal intellect, it's not as helpful, right? Because Mexican laws don't come into play in my cases. So they're all learning American laws from scratch. So sometimes a little bit of experience can help, but for the most part, they're all starting from zero. So unless they have prior American law firm experience, which is not normal, because if they did, that means they probably lost that job. Or maybe the law firm, had a transition or whatever. But personal injury is not a field in Mexico per se. And so commonly we're hiring people who we know are smart and we know who can learn. And that's what I always say about hiring lawyers versus paralegals. They've been in college longer, right? They had to go to law school. And so they've learned how to learn. And that's the fulcrum on training, right? What do we hate most is retraining people. It's so aggravating, right? I've gone over this with you. Why are we doing this again, right? For people who have learned how to learn, I'm not saying never, but the likelihood of retraining them is little. What you'll find is that they want to get trained on new stuff, and they want to keep learning. And if you're like a member of PILMA and you can send them videos of other things to go learn, study these videos and then let's talk, these are smart people. They will study them and they will watch them and they will take notes. And it's very exciting.
It makes a lot of sense because, clearly there are challenges. There are challenges running a business with boots on the ground in your own office with respect to process and on-the-job training. But you layer on the fact that somebody may be thousands of miles away and you exponentially increase the challenge, which then you're saying it's a matter of you start with the talent. And the talent often takes care of that, even if there are potentially deficiencies in your standard operating procedures or something else. You lean on the talent to be able to overcome that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, obviously we want to hire kind people, right? People who will treat other people in the office nicely, who will treat clients nicely, who will be polite in their interactions with you and other people in the office. And you really want to hire talented, smart people because you want that ceiling to be non-existent. You want to be able to push them to be their best and to be the best version of whatever they want to be to help your firm. And that's the miracle of economics, is it puts you in positions to hire people who could also be law school professors, but really would like to be a legal assistant in your firm. And that's frankly not possible in the United States. No. It's not feasible economically. So that's the proposition.
I see it. I'd like, as we wrap up here, I'd like to kind of come full circle because we've talked all around the clear value of outsourcing strategically. But are there any particular roles in-house that you've just learned are better off keeping in-house and not even turning the corner on looking outside?
Well, so my preferred model is that you use the Mexican staff to support your American staff, and that you don't put them out on islands. You already have American staff who are trained in dealing with clients and dealing with courthouses and JAs and providers and what have you. But there are certain tasks that those case managers have to deal with on every file that could be done by somebody else. And so you have someone who maybe could handle maybe 85, let's say, pre-suit files, right? Well, with the support of a really talented legal assistant in Mexico, maybe now they can handle 160, 150, right? Same with litigation. Normally they run hot on lit files at like 65, right? 70. With the support of a legal assistant in Mexico, now they're redlining at like 115, 120. That is a dynamic change to your overhead and your abilities in the office. But more importantly, the client experience is so dramatically impacted by this, because now those American case managers that you have that are very well trained, they probably worked for you for 5-10 years, they're spending more time with the clients. They're spending that extra 3 minutes on that phone call, right? Not I got to go, finish your story. Like that extra time with the provider on a negotiation, that extra time with the JA, right? Like no matter what anybody tells me, being a lawyer is relationships and sales. It is. You got to sell your case, and you have to have good relationships to get things done. And your case managers in your office, their highest use, in my opinion, is usually always relationships, right? Because we can't talk to our own clients every single day. We would never get anything done. But they can, right? And when they're taken away to do work that could be done elsewhere, they can speak to less clients. So that, to me, that's the best use. But obviously intake, that's a like my intake, I've got a team in Mexico and I have a team in the United States, and they work together to handle the calls. They transfer information to each other. But in the office, if you can back people up with, like you could hire a physician to, summarize medical records who could work with your paralegal in America, right? You can hire accountants to work with your bookkeeper, somebody who has an MBA and has accounting certificates, who just happens to live in Mexico, to work with, like, let's be honest, a lot of us have bookkeepers who are like folks who, did their friends' taxes, are organized, but they don't have accounting degrees or MBAs, right? But you could support them with somebody who does. How does that not help you deliver a better client experience and run a more organized office, right?
Makes a lot of sense. Jason, I appreciate you so much taking time to educate our listeners around this concept. Hopefully more and more are encouraged to do that. I'm interested, what's the best way for someone to find you if they're wanting to dig into this concept further with you?
Well, you can find me on Instagram. A lot of people have Jason Melton Esquire. But the easiest way to find Regents is just go to our website, regentsrs.com. That's Regents Remote Services. And there'll be an immediate place where you can put your name and phone number or email address in, and I will contact you personally. If you want to mention that you saw me on this podcast, that will help me as well. But just go to our website and put your info in, and I'll contact you. You're not going to go into some call service or anything. But yeah, it's an awesome journey. We've had so much fun doing this. Obviously, my firm has been impacted by this, but being able to work with so many of my friends and colleagues all over the country has been really, really fun. It's one thing about personal injury work is sometimes it does get a little redundant, and to do this for me personally has been great because it's kind of given me another boost in my step to go attack personal injury in my own firm in ways that I hadn't thought of before, because I'm just energized by talking to so many of my friends all over the country. So it's been an awesome experience.
Well, you're a wealth of knowledge, not just in outsourcing, but I have thoroughly enjoyed watching the journey from the outside, Jason, and you growing this side of the business. Very fascinating, and I appreciate you doing it with an emphasis on serving the client Truly, that says a lot, and I've personally observed that. So thank you very much for taking time. Looking forward to the next one.
Thanks, Tanner.
See you, Jason.
LAWsome by ConsultWebs with Tanner Jones. For show notes, links, and info, go to consultwebs.com/podcast. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Watch for the next LAWsome episode to discover more breakthrough insights to build a thriving law firm.